And we are recording. This is the Kubernetes SIG Network meeting for Thursday, March 22nd. We've got a pretty full agenda today, so let's go right into it. Paris, you want to start us off with contributor experience?
Yes, for sure. Hi, everyone. For those who don't know me, my name is Paris. I am a co-chair for the Special Interest Group for Contributor Experience. What we're trying to do is do a little roadshow of sorts. And hold on, let me kill my notifications here. Reason why is we know that this is a very large and complex project now, and getting messages out can be difficult in this setting since email is just so rigorous sometimes. So what we're going to do is quarterly go around the SIGs and let folks know what we're doing. All of you are contributors, awesome contributors to say the least. So we just want to make sure that everybody's on the same page. I did include in the notes a very lengthy document about like what we're doing and why. So I just kind of want to go through that at a very high level and also leave it for you to do, leave it for you to read and give us feedback at a later date. So first and foremost, just wanted to kick it off and say that one of the main goals this year for contributor experience is to automate, and if not automate, then document, and also to work on contributors having the same experience across repos. We've been getting a ton of feedback from both new and current contributors that it's hard for them to jump back and forth in different repos when there's different contribution workflows and bots and labels mean different things in certain places. So one of the things that we're looking for feedback from this group on is like how you're using certain bot commands, how you're using certain labeling, things like that. And we're working on label definitions right now, also better defining bot commands and things like that. There are links in the document as well on where you can comment on these things and where we can have open discussions about that. Also, we've been working on a lot with issue triage guidelines, and we want to see what your thoughts are on applying all current on the issue triage guidelines that we have across all Kubernetes GitHub repositories. And then also with the labeling, we're really trying hard to get this right because one of the things that we are trying to do is link a lot of labels to some of the DevStats dashboards. If you're not familiar with DevStats, definitely check it out. It's 20 plus dashboards that show the health and the velocity of the project. And by adding labels in there, that would be another filter for us to have, which will be great for us to define the health and metrics of the project. And the most important piece to this rant is that we have defined in our charter how you can find out about these types of changes and how we communicate in general, because we know that's been one of, necessarily a bad suit for us in the past, is just, again, how people find out about this stuff. So what we plan on doing is doing a lazy consensus with a time box of at least 72 hours to the following mailing lists with a GitHub issue link with the subject of notice. And this would just mean if it's like an org-wide change that we're trying to push or a change that would affect multiple contributors. And those mailing lists would include the contributor experience mailing list, the SIG lead mailing list, and the Kubernetes development mailing list. So if you are a part of the Kubernetes development, you're definitely going to find out. But then also we are going to do something else and do community meeting Thursday announcements. So that'll be another way for you to get that information. I mentioned charter. We did just complete our charter, but we actually are going to be going back today and doing updates to that because we have renamed the SIG lead units into chairs. And then we've also adopted the technical lead model that the steering committee has given governance on. So if you want to check ours out, it's there, but it is going to change today. We're also including sub-project owners. And if this crew needs any help with charter-related things, we're happy to help as well. I also included a projects list. This is all the projects that are currently underway with contributor experience, and we'd love to have more involvement from other devs on the project for some of this stuff. And I wanted to include that so you know and have an idea of what it is we're actually working on. And then we've also pumped out a new version of a contributor guide, and we would love for you to poke holes at it and review and make any comments that you think we should do and make better. We are doing a developer guide as well, and that is underway currently. The link for the issue is in there as well, and we would love to have comments on this. We know this is definitely going to be a lot of work. But the more we can get comments on, the better, because then we can either make new documentation that's referencing the material that you think is missing, or update the information that you think we already have that just needs to be updated. So that's about workflow and documentation and things like that. The next section that I wanted to discuss is mentoring. So how does your group currently do mentoring? And this isn't necessarily for just new contributors either. I'm talking about all ladders of our rung, so members, reviewers, approvers, etc. We've created a ton of different kinds of mentoring programs that address things like time burdens, and that was one of the main things that I've been thinking about in planning these things is what can we do that releases a lot of the time burdens from traditional mentoring programs that would still help and build success for people. One of those things is this concept of mentors on demand, which is very similar to user office hours, but this is contributor office hours, if you will. We're dubbing it Meet Our Contributors. So this is targeting new and current contributors. It's a live stream session every month, first Wednesday of the month. We would love to have you come on. If you want, there on YouTube, you can go and see our previous sessions. It's just us talking on Zoom, and we collect questions in Slack and Twitter, and the questions range from what's your favorite color to why is my end-to-end test flaking, and we help them out however we can. We also do a new concept called group mentoring. This is something that's very new to the course in general. So this would be a 4-to-1 mentoring relationship. And it's like a 2 to 3 month process depending on where you're trying to go. Right now we have a test with COPS, Workload API, and KubeADM, where we're taking a group of 10 people who are all current members into code reviewership. And we have bi-weekly stand-ups. We do different kinds of workshops. Tim came on and did a code review session that was very highly rated. So we would love to have involvement from this crew and the leads and chairs. If you want to reach out to me and on how we can get you involved, that would be really awesome. And then we're also creating a buddy program. This is more similar to like a one-on-one traditional. However, it's definitely not that. This is a 1 hour, one time only session with someone, and you get to ask them anything and do whatever you would like in this 1 hour. So if you want to pair program with someone that you don't get the time to do, if you want to do a code review session for an hour, if you want to ask them anything, this is where you would do it. We're hoping to have a test out within the next 2 to 3 weeks on this, so more soon on that information. And then really the last thing I wanted to talk about is Slack. I know Slack is definitely a hot topic for us lately. But just to give you some data, we onboarded 2,000 new people in the last 30 days. So this is still very much of a beast. We now have almost 34,000 members in Slack. So it would be cool if we could have more things pinned to your channels, like important documents, like your charter and how people can get involved in your group, because Slack is sort of this portal right now into entrance of being a contributor or a user of Kubernetes. So just a very cool way of getting someone up to speed is just through pinning documents and being helpful on Slack. We also have a Slack admins group now if you need anything. We have Slack guidelines. We actually just created an announcements channel today, and that's going to be really cool because then we'll have things like code freeze and other really important org-wide announcements come through on that. And then last but not least, user office hours. We would love to have more people talking to our users through user office hours. Yesterday was the office hour sessions, and they go really well. They're viewed by hundreds of people, and the questions are pretty awesome. But that's it for me. I just wanted to kind of bridge this gap between contributor experience and other SIGs. So if you have any feedback for us as far as what we're doing, why we're doing it, how we're doing it, or what we could do better, please visit our Slack channel, visit our mailing list, send a pigeon owl, whatever.
Awesome. Thanks, Paris. That's awesome amount of information. It sounds like a lot of work has gone into this.
Quick question, Paris.
Yeah.
For the roadshow document link that you have linked there, what are the access permissions on that document?
I shared it with Kubernetes SIG Networking Google group, but I have it set for comments to that. I was going to open it up to everybody once we're done with the roadshow, but okay. I can add individuals. If you request it, I can add you.
Okay, no problem. I was just logged in as somebody else, so.
Oh yeah. No, as soon as you're on the whatever access you have for the mailing list, you'll be able to see it.
Cool. We don't have a lot of time for questions because I think we have a pretty full agenda. But if anybody has one or two, we might be able to fit them in. Otherwise, go to town on that document. There's a lot of information there and a lot of links to follow through. It looks like.
Yep.
All right. Next on today's list is the SIG test review, and I think we can keep this relatively quick. I looked in advance, and there are kind of two areas of test that are in trouble at the moment. The first is the kubeadm tests, which Bowie also pointed out, and I think I've been in trouble for a while. And then the second are the IPVS tests, which are also showing lots of failures. So I think we just need to figure out who's running with these. I know that Dane, yeah, go ahead.
For the GCI, GC, IPVS, we have one PR out now that should fix a couple of those. But other than that, we still need to address the overall red color on there. So that's just an update. We have one PR out to fix some of it. We'll
So that's going to fix one issue, but presumably there's a bunch more out there.
Yeah, that's we're going to have to work on in the future.
Are any of the IPVS guys from Huawei on the call?
Yes, IPVS CI is fields are fixed in our local GC cluster. There are 2 PRs in flight and still under review. I can confirm these fields can be fixed by these 2 PRs.
Do you need review help on those PRs, or what's blocking those PRs at this time?
Rohit is assigned to review the PR, and it will be great if more people can have a review. I will send the PR numbers sent out.
Yeah, I think Tim and I are both looking at them. I think one of them was still work in progress, but yeah, we're aware of all the PRs that are out, and hopefully we can get them in as soon as possible.
Actually, I'm leaning on Rohit a lot to do the reviews right now. I'm being pulled in 10 directions. If we're stuck and you think the PR is ready for like final approval, please make sure, like, ping me out of band or something to make sure that it pops to the top of my stack.
Okay.
Cool. And could you also just put those in the meeting notes so that we have them as a reference? We can check back on the status for those. And then the other set was the kubeadm tests, where Dan had done some investigation. Dan, I'm not sure if you're on the call, but
Yeah, I'm here. Yeah, there was a fix that Ben the Elder put in for the kubedmin GCE tests, and it made things much better. But I don't think that's been propagated to all the other kubedmin tests. I put a link into the that pull test in for pull request.
So on the topic of who owns these tests, do we know what SIG thinks they own this? I mean, they're obviously on our dashboard and are vaguely related to networking.
This is kind of a tweener test,
Yeah.
I think. I mean, the cluster lifecycle guys have a part in it too, and test infra, and it's kind of a three-way ownership, really. Should be.
So we're saying we think it's just a matter of applying this patch that Ben the Elder did for the flannel tests to the other three jobs.
Yeah, there's a bunch of tests called kubedmin and with kubedmin GCE, and he applied a fix to those, but I think there's a whole bunch more that need it.
Okay. So I can try to follow up with Ben the Elder and just see, or Dane, if you want to do that. If he was intending to put those up for the other jobs as well, or if that's something we should do.
Yeah, if you can get it to within the next week, but I'm kind of busy this week.
Sure, I'll try to reach out to him. Okay, so moving on, I think you wanted to talk about the traffic shaping proposal?
Hello, gentlemen. Currently, the Kubernetes code supports applying basic traffic shaping during pod setup. This will happen if bandwidth related annotations have been added to the pod's metadata. However, Kubernetes CNI code doesn't support it because there was no traffic shaping plugin. But we can replicate this behavior we have today in Kubernetes if we feel this is an important feature. In fact, CNI has already supported traffic shaping plugin, and there's a proposal, and some people have reviewed it. So what's your opinion? If we replicate the behavior, I think the code change is very small. So just your comment or opinion, if it's important or not.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's largely there, right? There's the CNI plugin done, and at this point, it's a matter of if somebody is willing to do the work to support the feature, right? The capability in the kubelet, like we do for port map today.
Yeah, there's a little bit more work that has to be done. Port map uses these capability arguments, these sort of dynamic configuration substitutions, and we haven't merged those into the CNI traffic shaping plugin yet.
Right, okay.
So it can be merged essentially now into KubeNet, since KubeNet generates its own config, but it is not yet available for generic CNI in Kubernetes.
So it kind of sounds like this is a two-step process. I mean, merging into KubeNet would allow us to remove all of the KubeNet code that does bandwidth shaping on it by itself and get a bunch of code out. And then as a second step, as part of the KubeNet deprecation, add the capabilities to the CNI driver to pass that through, right?
And
Yes, I agree.
also
Okay.
add the capabilities to the plugin itself to
Right.
support the
Yep.
capabilities
On the CNI
advertising.
side, yeah.
Sorry, I have a general question. Because Kubernetes use traffic shipping in the PKG-UTL bandwidth, and the thing I will use also I use traffic shipping, but the code is auto tree. So my question is, should we use CNI plugin in Kubernetes or not?
So this is Minhan here. So since we are like deprecating KubeNet, so probably there's not much value backporting it into KubeNet. So if I understand correctly, does just need to change the CNI network plugin side to massage the data from annotation and then pass it down to the CNI plugin, right?
Yeah.
So and I have a comment for this. So so this feature, although it exists for quite some time, but it's never like graduate to beta or GA, because it's like actually there's a lot more requirement to formally support bandwidth shaping, traffic shaping, and bandwidth based scheduling and whatnot. So basically, I would expect it to like to stay in alpha even after this, even after the change to CNI network plugin.
Okay, I agree. Sorry, and the another question is, should we graduate the feature from annotation to spec or not? Because traffic shipping currently behavior is just ingress bandwidth and egress bandwidth. But the CNI plugin has support burst ingress bandwidth and burst egress. So what I mean, replace traffic shipping from PKG-UTL bandwidth to CNI plugin is CNI plugin has plenty of features in traffic shipping, and if we want to deprecate Kubernetes in the future.
Is the question whether we should move this from annotations to spec fields? I think the answer is, for the first step, we would leave it how it is, and we would need to have that larger discussion about what's required to move this from alpha to beta. But that could be a follow-on after we do the work to support this in CNI.
Yeah, I think there's, I mean, don't get me wrong, I hear this from several people, but I think there's a lot of concerns around using this as a general mechanism. I'm not convinced that every CNI plugin out there can reasonably implement bandwidth shaping in the same way. And I'm concerned about whether it becomes like a schedulable resource or whether it's just a constraint, but we don't actually schedule on it and therefore overcommittable. I think we would need to consider those things pretty carefully. And I'm more concerned even about that the Google experience with
there is no port showing up there, so which means from the plugin we are not even going at port.
Sorry, I think somebody's talking. Could you
Is it
please
in
mute?
powered up state? It is in powered up state.
Not sure who that is.
I think it's Sachin. Can you mute, please?
Also, Casey, you can force mute people if you're
there we
like
go.
moderator.
Yes, I was just looking for the right person.
I was looking for the button too. Anyway, the long story short was I'm happy to discuss this. We've certainly heard it from enough people that it's worth discussing, but it's not as simple as we should just promote what we have into fields.
Yep. I think. Sorry.
The alpha feature is the barrier is really low, and if we don't discuss the port spec, just use the annotation. So my question is, should we support it? Because if we don't determine if we don't make this decision, and the PR will be always pending, and no one will discuss or put a comment.
So the right place to discuss this isn't in a pull request over the code. It's in a pull request over a design proposal, because it's a much bigger topic. Like, honestly, the annotations that we have are sort of a vestigial leftover piece of an older era, and they probably should have been deleted a long time ago, but they were really just sort of no cost, so we let them ride. But they don't apply to all network plugins. They don't work well with the plugin model, and they're not, I don't believe that they're scalable in the way that we want the system to work. And so we shouldn't, even though the bar is pretty low for alpha features, we shouldn't alpha things that we have no plans of taking further. So we need to discuss that.
Okay. And I strongly suggest the support of this feature, because it will make Kubernetes and CNI more consistent, and we make it possible to deprecate Kubernetes in the future.
So like I said, I welcome the conversation. I've heard it from a customer again just this week, like literally this week. So I'm happy to discuss it. I and many others have thoughts about how we would actually want to express it and how we would want to implement it, and they don't look like what we've currently got with those annotations.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So to be clear, Tim, are you saying that we should kind of leave the current annotations as they are, or is it okay to try to spin these out to the CNI plugins through the CNI driver, and then also continue in parallel with discussions around formalizing bandwidth shaping?
The latter.
Agree.
I have no problem spinning them out to CNI plugins. It's a cool thing for people to be able to do, but it's not at all clear how we want to express it through the Kubernetes API, like first class. Keeping it second class,
okay.
I don't care.
Okay. Agree.
Cool. So let's continue that discussion either on the mailing list or the existing proposal, or both.
Yeah, I just filed an issue to update our other CNI bandwidth shaping plugin to add those annotations. It turns out it was just in my head.
Cool. So I think we have a couple of demos next. Vikas, sorry if that's not pronounced correct. Are you on the call?
Yeah, hi, I'm here. That's Vikas.
Vikas.
Yeah.
Thanks.
No problem. Yeah. So, shall I start?
Go ahead.
Thank you. So, I'm going to share my screen. Wait a second. Okay. Are you guys able to see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So actually, I'm Vikas from Red Hat, and I'm going to present this idea where it enables to be able to use a specialized network hardware for network-heavy user application ports. And this solution ties together device plugin and a CNI plugin. And also this solution is based on CRT-based multi-network de facto standard, because adding a specialized network hardware is essentially another, it will be in the form of another network to the user port. So here is how the story starts. first of all, admin creates a. I'm assuming here a few details. I'm just assuming that folks are aware about the about the facts which are already there in the network CRD based multi-network de facto standard. So just to save some time, I'm just trying to skip explaining those, but please feel free to interrupt whenever you feel that I might be going too fast. So storage starts with the admin creating a CRD based network object. So as we see in this slide, these network objects are created for example, control network and the data network. Now, in this solution, because we are using device plugins, admin is expected to know which how the device plugin is going to advertise by what extended resource name device plugin is going to advertise that network. So with that and that annotation, it is expected that admin will add here. For example, here, if I'm using ABC plugin.io, ABC plugin, CNI plugin, and that plugin is also serving the device plugin APIs and advertising, it is expected that this plugin will advertise networks to be consumed using device plugin APIs in this format. So admin is expected to know this. In future, this could be a resource class name. So essentially, this is the mapping between the network CRD object and the resource with which this CRD object is going to be mapped. So today, because we don't have resource classes, today it's going to be mapped with a resource name which is going to be advertised from device plugin. So then at this network creation, one second. Okay, so when admin creates this network CRD object, then this object, network object, gets created at the API server, and it is expected that this CNI DP daemon will observe this network creation, and if it figures out that the plugin name in the network object is me, then this plugin, the CNI part of this daemon will invoke the provider API to get that to get the actual network created at the host level. So corresponding to the network CRD object, the daemon will then invoke the provider API or provision that network at the host level. And then once it has created successfully the network at the host level or at the cluster level in the infrastructure, the availability will be advertised through the DP API, list and watch API to the kubelet, and then kubelet will show the availability of that network in the node status. So this is the network creation flow. So admin creates CRD object, daemon figures this out, that watches this, and after figuring out, okay, it's this network object is targeting me with the plugin name, then this daemon, CNI daemon, provisions that network at the host level and then advertises it to the kubelet using the DP APIs, and then this network becomes available in the node status as an allocatable resource, extended resource, just like any other extended resource which today device plugin is able to advertise, for example, GPUs. So now how the pod is going to request attachment to these networks. So this is going to be the same as mentioned in the CRD based multi-network de facto standard using the this standard annotation. the pod will request, will mention the network CRD object names like control network. So these CTR-net, data-net are the names of the CRD network objects that this pod wants to. So user needs to just mention the CRD network object names which the admin has created. Now there will be a admission controller. Network resource, I'm just calling it a network resource admission controller. So this network, this admission controller will figure out, okay, will figure out what CRD objects will fetch the network CRD objects which were requested in the pod object, and then after in those in the network object, it will look for the annotation resource name, which is actually which we discussed in the previous slide, which is the mapping between the network object and the resource which this network CRD object is going to consume. And then admission plugin, this admission controller will mutate the pod request to add in the limit section in a way in which the scheduler can understand that the scheduler has to schedule on which node scheduler has to schedule this pod. So so admission controller mutates the resources section in the pod spec, and so from the annotation in the pod object, admission controller adds the limit section in the mutates the resources section in the pod spec. And another task with another responsibility which admission controller has to perform is to add a as a context UID, which is a UID generated by admission controller in the pod annotations. So we'll see why what is the use of this context UID, why we need this. So after the pod object leaves the admission controller, so these are the fields which the admission controller has added. So admission controller has added a context UID and the request and the limit section. So after that, now this is the complete pod creation flow. So this we have discussed now till the point number 3, that pod gets created at the API server, and because it has extended resources kind of format in the limits and in the resources section, scheduler can figure out like in a native way which nodes are able to support this pod, which nodes has this network availability, and pod gets scheduled onto a node which has advertised this network availability. After the pod reaches the now the admit phase starts on the kubelet for this pod, and in the admit phase, the device manager part of the kubelet invokes the allocate API, RPC API at this CNI DP daemon set. So in the allocate API, it will ask for the device ID of the interfaces which were advertised to the kubelet using the list and watch DP API previously, which is a functionality of the device plugin and device manager, where all the available resources are continuously streamed to the kubelet through the DP API. So when in the admit phase, this allocate RPC call is invoked at the device plugin at this combined CNI plus device plugin daemon. And now in context of this specialized NIC, in the response, in the allocate response, whatever mount paths and the environment variables are required to be present in the container, those are sent in the allocate response to the kubelet. Also, like this is a ask from the DP API that in the allocate we want to extend allocate to pass port annotations also to the device plugin. So the context UID which we saw in the previous slide, which the admission controller was adding in the port object, that needs to get passed to the CNI DP plugin, and that that context ID is used to track the track this request, like while the request goes to the CNI as well. So when we have passed these mount paths to the kubelet, and the kubelet has allocated those mount paths and these device for a pod, CNI today this device plugin will not be able to know which port is using that allocated interface. So when the request comes to the CNI for attaching the network, then CNI will not know which interface was allocated to this port. So for that, we are this proposal is asking for adding context UID by admission controller, and that will be used as a cookie to figure out as a magic glue to figure out like which port is using which interface. So when the request reaches at the CNI and the CNI invokes the CNI add call, we are expecting like meta plugin, which is described in detail in the CRD based de facto standard document. So one example is a multiples of that. Then it will, after providing a default network, this meta plugin will look for this annotation, networks annotation string, and see what are the networks, what are the network CRD objects corresponding which are requested in the port object. And then after fetching the network CRD object, it figures out what is the CNI binary name which this meta plugin needs to actually invoke to get this additional network attached to the port. So using this mechanism, this is the same as the multi-network CRD based proposal, no change there. So this meta plugin invokes the CNI static binary, and then this binary talks to the CNI DP daemon over a Unix socket. This CNI binary is a stateless binary, but CNI DP daemon stores a mapping of context UID to the device allocated device. So this CNI static binary figures out the context UID from the port annotations and pass and giving this context UID to the daemon, it requests the interface which the binary needs to pass into the container namespace. And these steps which I just explained are mentioned here, that CNI invokes the add to get network configuration done for the port, and then meta plugin figures out using the network objects, CRD objects, how to invoke the what is the name of the executable, and then meta plugin invokes the executable. Then executable, this binary executable, pass the context UID to figure out the allocated device to the daemon, and because daemon is stored it at the time of the allocate call, daemon passes the interface name which it needs to, which this static binary needs to pass into the container, this port network namespace, and that's how this circle completes, and the interface, this even specialized network hardware will be available to use in the port network namespace, because CRI would have already mounted the paths character devices which are required for the libraries to be able to communicate from within the container to the hardware to the network driver without and bypassing the kernel. So, and this is the last slide. This is the port deletion flow. This will be the same as the addition. So del will be invoked at this static binary. And then again, from the context UID, it will be figured out like which interface was allocated to the port, and then deallocate will happen of that interface. So that was all I wanted to share. Questions?
I think from the chat there are a lot of questions.
Okay.
So can I ask the first question? I know the next agenda item, I guess, is Fabian, and I've pre-read some docs, but it's unclear to me what the difference or what the overlap is between this and what Fabian's about to propose.
I think Fabian can answer it after me, but as far as my understanding goes, Fabian is asking some changes in the DP API which will enable to pass the interface into the port network namespace from the device plugin allocate API itself. And like device plugin will invoke internally CNI and will not wait for the kubelet to invoke the CNI. And additionally, it requires some changes in the CNI and CRI as well. So in detail, I think Fabian can explain. So my ask is only to pass the port detail to the device plugin. The ask of my proposal to figure out this mapping between the allocated device and the port which is using that device. So I think that all is needed for supporting.
It's Vish here.
Yeah.
Thanks for presenting this first of all. But then, I mean, I see your ask on trying to extend the device plugin API, but the overall like user journey seems really complicated, and I don't know how people would consume this and productionize this. And on one hand, like there are many other reasons to extend the device plugin API, so that might just happen over time. But for this specific use case, are you like really seeking feedback from the community on like figuring out a better strategy for handling network devices, or are you just like saying that you want this specific extension and then you're not really looking for feedback on the overall idea?
No. We are looking for the overall feedback, of course.
Yeah.
Okay, because depending on that, like our feedback or the questions would change.
Yeah. My initial feedback is sort of the same as Vish, that this is a pretty complicated Baroque way of making things happen, where it really screams to me that there's some other primitives missing, or some other linkages missing. And given that we have 10 whole minutes left, Fabian, I don't know if you're here, but I think your slot is in jeopardy. But I think that this applies to both topics. I'm all for trying to figure out how to make this work. And in fact, I believe very strongly we should be able to make a single plugin binary that satisfies both networking and device plugins. I don't think that cobbling things together through Unix sockets and passing namespace IDs around is going to be the right way to do it.
I think that's implementation detail. I agree with you on that part, and I may not have presented a very nice story there on that part, like how those will communicate among themselves. There could be like better solutions on that part.
So I think that there's a nugget of interesting here, and I think that it's a neat way to sort of do the prototype. But I think that it feels like a prototype. What we really want is to figure out how we would actually turn this into a real living thing. And I think it's going to need deeper changes, which unfortunately means slower. But I think we can do it. But I have some like really fundamental use case questions that weren't answered by this or by even Fabian's docs. So how do we want to proceed with this? Like, we only have 8 minutes left. I can go into them now. I literally have 2 pages of notes from the doc pre-read, or we can take it back to email, or like, what else do people want? Are there more fundamental questions people have?
I feel like we should probably do this face-to-face if people can stick around for that, because
unfortunately,
it never quite seems to work.
Yeah, I know. And unfortunately, I cannot stick around this afternoon. I'm on kid duty. But I could meet again another time, or I mean, I hate to postpone it like a month, but KubeCon is coming up.
Yeah.
We could
Hello,
dedicate a bunch of. Yeah, hey Fabi. We could dedicate some time in the call for the plumbing working group next week on it. If people can make that time slot, we could do at least like half the meeting, or even probably 45 minutes on it.
I'm planning on going to that meeting too, but just FYI, resource management working group session will be going on at the same time. That's significant.
Oh, yeah.
So maybe a note. So hey, I'm Fabian, and so you know, I was planning to speak about the broader thing. Honestly, I think because there's so it's great to hear that we're looking for alignment. I think that's the key here to me, and so I think, you know, from our perspective, I mean, what Vikas was preparing, why it looked so complicated, is just because that is something that works today with few changes. Yep. But what my proposal is more about, and that's the difference between the two, is, you know, I did not, you know, care too much about, you know, how do the APIs look today, but rather how could it look in future? You know, how could we change device plugins? How could we eventually do smaller changes to CNI in order to fit all of this better together? I think a face-to-face at KubeCon would be really beneficial to deep dive into this thing, because it will need discussion.
To be clear, when I said face-to-face earlier, I meant either video chat or in person.
Okay.
Something real time, I mean.
Yeah, definitely. Email, I think, is in this stage not efficient enough. I would really love to hear your notes, the 2 pages. That would be really interesting to see.
Yes, I'm sorry. So I was asking in the chat, what's the point of this? And I got a different answer than what I think Tim said the point of this is. So I wonder if we're all even talking about the same thing.
I think that this is part of the problem. I know I pre-read Fabian's doc, and there's a couple of use cases in there. But some of the cases were things like, I have a physical topology that I need to represent through Kubernetes and be able to schedule against. Part of it was I have effectively fungible resources like SRIOV functions that are all effectively switched into a fabric, and any function can be any network, but there's a limited number of them. And then there's also this concern of, we have an increasing presence of devices that are actually multi-purpose devices. So, you know, it's a GPU with a network card slapped onto it, and those sorts of things. And our plugin model right now between networking and devices is just completely not coherent. Like, they don't interoperate at all. In fact, the thing that came to my attention through the conversations or through the reading was, they don't even use the same life cycle hooks.
Yeah.
The device plugin API operates in a very fundamentally different way than the network plugin API.
Okay, so this is, so you just listed 3 things, Tim. The first 2 sounded kind of similar in that they're about getting scheduling constraints in, correctly inferring the scheduling constraints implied by network attachments. And then the second one was this thing about a device that's both networking and something else. So what I'm hearing is 2 different sort of things we're trying to accomplish here. One is getting scheduling constraints injected, and the other is unifying these 2 different kinds of plugin models.
That's correct. The reason that I lump them together is I would like for a lot of this to become effectively opaque to the core system. And in order for that to happen, I really need the coordination and the handshaking to be done in a place where I don't have to see it, which to me says in the plugins. And right now, you can tell from the block diagram that Vikas just showed us, getting information between CNI and a device plugin requires heroic efforts.
Well put.
And like full credit for making it work at all. Like I'm not maligning what you've done in any way, but you are working around the existing, perhaps obsolete assumptions.
So I'm actually the second thing here about unifying the two plugin models. That's news to me. I'm not familiar with any devices that really beg for that to happen. Where would I go to learn about such things?
So the slide deck I shared on the email list, I think that's a good introduction. I specifically prepared that for the SIG Network audience. So, you know, brief introduction into device plugins and why we want to use them for networking as well. And maybe that's a good guideline. It has some links to the, you know, Kubernetes docs. You can go from there, I guess.
Yeah. A canonical example would be InfiniBand.
Yes, and I think we also saw some RDMA devices that may also fall into that category.
Yeah,
I'm thinking about the category. This is something that's not just networking. It's something else as well.
Yes, that's the thing. I mean, I would put it the other way around. Network devices, even overlay networks, are just another kind of device. And that is, I think, where the point of alignment is. If you take that device class, they share a lot of requirements you have on other devices as well, like scheduling awareness and, you know, lifecycle management. So setting them up and delivering drivers, all that kind of stuff. So I think there's a lot of overlap, which actually drove that idea. And now it's just to see, you know, how can we reassemble all of that into a more coherent approach.
So in trying to understand all of this in my head, I kept coming up with more questions about, well, what if this and what if that? And so I don't even think that I have a clear understanding of the actual requirements. I hope that a lot of these what ifs we can just say, yeah, don't do that. But like there's physical constraints that aren't really captured by the model, at least as I understand it. You know, if I have physical wiring that is into different networks, I'm not sure how to represent that, right? And I'm not sure that we can say we're not going to handle that, and I'm not sure that we can say that we have to either. I'm not sure which side of that fence we have to fall on.
So one note here is that I think this whole approach is, on the one hand side, is to some degree just a mechanism. I think it's you know, in large areas, it's just a mechanism to formalize how we get devices into pods and into containers. Depends on the namespace, obviously. And it doesn't solve some of the problems, like you said, physical wiring. But I think that can eventually, I mean, that is an operator problem. You know, how do I set up the physical wiring? I think we can set up conventions and maybe provide the right device plugin to support that physical wiring use case. But I think,
well, I have some pretty deep concerns about the mechanism that's in play, but in both this and in your proposal, specifically of overloading the resource names to represent networks. And it's not clear to me how one would represent sort of the physical topology. Here's what I'm proposing. I have, like I said, I have notes, and we didn't get to talk much about them today. I held off on sending them to you because they're sort of very hard to digest unless you're me. I will actually turn them into full sentences and send them to the mailing list in response to your slide decks. And we can go with that for now. I see from the chat that Dan's willing to volunteer his network plumbing call next week. For those people who are at the resource management face-to-face, can you pull aside an hour?
I mean, we could in theory like pull aside an hour, but we have a really packed agenda, and so I want to make sure that we discuss things that are going to actually be executed on upstream. And this
or can we then pull delegates? Like maybe not everybody who's going to be at both sessions needs to be at both sessions. Like Fabian, I don't know if you're going to be at the resource management thing. I'm assuming not, given that you're on a different continent, but you know, maybe.
No, I can be there. I will not be there.
Okay. Like Vish, I think you can trust me if you imbue me with everything you need from it. You need me to cover. I don't know where Jeremy wants to fall or where Vikas, which side of that line you'd want to fall on.
So technically the agenda ends at 3, which is 1 hour after, I think, the SIG network slot Pacific time. I may be messing with the time zones. That afternoon is a super interesting topic. We're trying to get through the resource API stuff. Is there any chance we could move the call 1 hour later on next Thursday, so that we could not have that spreading of folks?
I could do that. I could go from 3 anytime until about 6 on next Thursday.
I think the only consideration would be if there's anybody on the East Coast, since that would be 6 p.m. for those people.
Yeah, I can tolerate that.
For me, it's 3:30 a.m. at this time.
Tim, does it have to happen next week?
No, but I don't want to. So many proposals here need work, and then they just fall the wayside because we never actually muster around them.
That's right. I agree. I feel like if we do it's bad timing that next Thursday is what it is, but I also don't want to lose the opportunity to iterate in a tight loop for a short period of time and hopefully get some, not closure necessarily, but progress anyway.
So Vikas, if it's 3:30 in the morning, do you trust Jeremy to represent your concerns, or do you trust Fabian to represent your concerns?
I trust Jeremy and Fabian both, but I'll also be there. No problem.
Well, you're going to be in California with us, so for next week, because
yes,
I'll be there. This is what we're talking about. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So that's not such a big deal.
Yeah.
You might be jet lagged, but that's what it is. So I'm free. Let's should we say 3 o'clock?
And are you talking about the Zoom chat or only in face-to-face?
I'm saying, can we do a Zoom at 3 o'clock next Thursday and put aside maybe 2 whole hours for it, and hopefully we don't need it all?
Sounds good.
Sure.
Yeah, and this invalidates some of the topics we have for the face-to-face, I think, or is in lieu of anyway, that we have on the agenda. Tim, we had some of these topics on the agenda for that discussion, and
okay,
may not need to have it in that context.
I have to drop off right now. I'm late for my next one. I will see you guys in a week, and I will send my notes out before then.
Thank you.
All right.
Thanks
everybody.
Thanks.